Good morning, everyone. Just a heads up, I'm going to need to leave a few minutes early. Well, probably about 20 after 11, actually.
Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
I just had a note that Janine will be joining us, but that she's running late.
We have all our folks on yet?
So far, there's only 4 of us that are members of the committee.
Okay, I know Angel said she was gonna be on. I spoke to her this morning.
Sharita, did you hear my announcement that I need to leave about 20 after 11?
Is that why you're dressed up?
That is why I'm dressed up.
I
Indeed.
didn't, but thanks for letting me know.
All right. Have a funeral to go to at noon.
But our
In
agenda
Hills-
is
in
short,
Hillsborough.
so
Okay.
So Sharita, we're up to 5 committee members.
So Bill did respond to me, and he wants you seen at the South Point Cardiology Clinic. So I actually called Bill about scheduling an appointment, but I thought maybe I would really would be better leaving that to you. One thing, Bill put you on hold for 50 million years, and I need to keep moving. But the other thing is I didn't know exactly.
Janine just texted and said she would be late. She's tied up in a senior management meeting with the county.
I think Ebony is not at work.
Right.
Yeah, Ruby put in a note that in chat that she's on vacation.
Do we know Commissioner Carter is coming? Because we were hoping for an update from her. So I see Levette's on. She's Janine's proxy.
Yes, good morning.
Can we take some time right now and review the minutes? We need one more person. Is that correct?
Yes. I think that's correct.
Colleen is joining.
All right. And Sharita, one thing we don't have on the agenda, but we did talk about in May and asked staff to come back with information on, was the transition regarding the COC liaisons, because Malcolm, Valerie, and I are all liaisons and timing out. It seems there was maybe a interesting system piece where it was designed for folks to serve 2 years, but it doesn't run concurrent with when the sort of new committees set up and the new executive committee sets up and all that stuff. We had asked in May for staff to come back with information on, whether we could all like transition out. We were willing to do that at the end of August, not in a huff, but just to make it a little easier. Do we have any information back on that possibility, or where we might be with that, or could we add that to the agenda?
If everyone else is okay with adding that to the agenda, we can. I think what we talked about in last month's meeting was trying to make this meeting not necessarily, since it was a special call meeting, a long meeting.
Sure.
Are you guys okay with adding that?
Yes.
I got one yes, Ms. Colleen. Anyone else? All right, we will add that to the agenda. We might be able to go ahead and get that update now because Commissioner Carter is not on, and I think we were holding our discussion of the 300, 500 block next steps for some updates from her about numbers. Is that correct? I think that's what we talked about. Okay, so can we just go ahead and review the minutes? I know I didn't have it on the agenda. Please excuse my brain. But can we review the minutes for June's meeting and May meeting and move forward with seeing if we can get those approved so they can go on record? I walked away. Did I get any motions on any of the minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes. Ms. Helen.
Are you June and May, Ms. Colleen?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a motion to approve the May and June 2021 minutes. Do I have a second?
Second,
Who is that?
Helen.
Thanks, Helen. Seconded by Helen. All those in favor, you can put yes in the chat box. Or do you need it out loud, or what's the best thing for you?
Oh, no, it's perfectly fine. But thank you to you all for realizing last month that I would have to watch this on YouTube and calling out your votes. It made life a lot easier. But when I'm here, it's okay. Do it in chat.
Any no's? Looks like the motion carries. I don't think Commissioner Carter is on. Do you guys want to push this to the end of the meeting in hopes that Commissioner Carter calls? All right. The next item on our agenda is shared housing. So on last Friday, I think we had our shared housing meeting. It was very informative. I was still a little disappointed trying to figure out how we will move forward as a community on this. If it's something that we decide to agree to. I will entertain any discussion at this time. Lord, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm happy to respond to questions, but I don't feel there's a need to add anything at this point.
I know initially I was intrigued by this idea that potentially a landlord could get more money, but I think I was not clear on that, and she made it very clear. In my mind, if that was an option, maybe not necessarily them getting 2 times for the unit, but if there was a little bump in how much they could potentially get for the unit if they took 2 leases on a monthly basis, I think that would be incentivized, and it would maybe give us an opportunity to engage some new landlords. But otherwise, I don't know.
Well, I do think there's opportunities on that point, Madam Chair. I think there are opportunities for landlords to rent, for example, a 2-bedroom unit to 2 individuals for somewhat more than the 2-bedroom unit might be rented to a single family household. For example, if the 2-bedroom unit is typically to one household is rented for $1,000, I think it would be possible within fair market rent rules and guidelines to rent to 2 unrelated adults for $600 each. I don't think that is out of the realm of possibility.
Have you seen any pilots where they did that or anything like that? Because she made it sound like the voucher would be reduced to accommodate like potentially like a cap on a max. You get what I'm saying? That's just kind of what I got from her response when I said, well, we could do that, it might work. Because I'm just trying to figure out how will we engage new landlords,
Well,
or even maybe some of our old landlords who have cherry picked what units they will allow us to rent for our folks, because there was some means for them to get a little bit more added guaranteed funds for the unit.
so my understanding is that the rent for a 2-bedroom unit, the rent for each unit, each bedroom could be up to the maximum allowed for a 1-bedroom. So I could be wrong in that, but that's my understanding. So, and as I shared in the meeting, in the workshop, if people have a housing choice voucher, it's advantageous to the housing authority if each of the 2 parties pays 30% of their income towards for rent. The 2 individuals, depending again on their income, would likely be able to pay more of the total income towards the rent than one household. So that would allow the housing authority to potentially take their overall housing choice voucher budget and be able to serve more households, because some of the households would be paying more than the average rent based on household income.
Did anybody else? I know that Malcolm was on. Was anybody else on?
Helen was on, as I recall.
Helen, you have any thoughts?
I was intrigued again, just by the same thing with the for extra income. Seems like it would open up some possibilities. Just to- yeah.
You know, because I think I brought up this suggestion of maybe piloting it with the housing choice voucher program, but I think that she was also talking about using rapid rehousing funds in the same way, even though that's a temporary subsidy. If we What steps would be the best steps for us to take if this was something we were considering? Because in my mind, the only way it would work is if we had a way to incentivize new landlords, along with a pilot, maybe with DHA willing to work with us on figuring out we can make it work. I mean, I think, as a community, endorsing or agreeing to be a shared housing community, we would have to have a plan where we could actually test it to see if it works.
So I do just want to clarify a few things. DHA already allows us to do shared housing with vouchers. So I don't think we would need a pilot. And while I do think the conversation about recruiting new landlords is important, I just want to say that I don't think that's our main barrier to shared housing. I think our much larger barrier to shared housing is providers and clients being on board with shared housing. I think certainly the conversation about bridging this to recruit new landlords is valuable, and I don't want to imply that it's not, but I think when we think about how to move to a shared housing model, my experience has been that the much larger barrier is on the side of us being willing to try it with clients, having an infrastructure to find clients who would be good matches for each other, how to talk to clients about how to prepare to be roommates, and how to for providers to know how to deal with something when a roommate situation doesn't work out. I think those are the larger barriers I've experienced.
I
would
would,
say that
go ahead, Russ.
I would say that one of the barriers, or like one of the, to your point, Hanalei, about the barriers being providers, like as a provider in this situation, I think the part of the barrier conversation is that it seems like a deep investment to take on to do those things that you just talked about. And the pilot part actually has me a little worried because the way that Dr. Taylor talked about it was as a ideology adjustment, or like a shift in ideology, which you don't just say like, all right, for 10 units or for 5 people or for this pot of rapid rehousing, we're going to make work, especially because what I really heard from that was that, and we don't need all the bells and whistles that some of the places in Connecticut have set up yet, or at least not this early in the process, but the dedicated staffing component, I think, was one thing that could play into it, and the training component, I think, were both really valuable as you orient that training towards not motivational interviewing around ending substance use or anything else like that, but about how it works in your household. So just a couple of thoughts that we'd want to find out which pieces we bought first, but that you'd have to kind of do that investment and then give it some time. And that's why I think that our community then saying after one presentation or after a couple of conversations to say, yes, we're bought into this. I just don't make investments that way myself. And I imagine that most people don't also either, without like really thinking through all the situations around it.
So I think
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Larry.
Larry.
from my perspective, I do think the conversation that I'm interested in is what kind of process policy and planning and or our COC board want to engage in to make a hopefully informed decision over the next several months as to whether or not we want the COC leadership wants to make a system-wide commitment to embracing shared housing approaches. We do have some piloting going on. I think for the Fresh Start project at Urban Ministries has used some shared housing. So we do have some local experience. I don't know if there's other experiences beyond that. But Dr. Taylor was really clear that if we're going to use shared housing in a significant way in Durham to address the affordable housing challenges that we know we're experiencing as in an increasingly high rent environment relative to our economy, that we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, and shared housing is a tool that largely, as Hanalea suggested, it's not our landlords that necessarily are an obstacle. It's their we don't embrace it as an entire system. Our community of homeless housing providers, perhaps because of it just hasn't been a paradigm, right? It hasn't been a way that we've considered, even though there's a lot of shared housing going on in the Durham community and around the nation for a whole host of reasons. Some people for lifestyle reasons and others.
So just in thinking of this, in my mind, I would think that if we as a community decided to pick up and utilize shared housing approaches in our community, be marketed to a certain subset of our clientele. I think it would be the people who were first-time homeless, who were brief, where life happened to them, they had an affordability issue. I saw it as a person with very low barriers. You're low bias for that person. You're very new to homelessness person, single person being intrigued by this opportunity. One, to end their homelessness as fast as it possibly could be. If it was piloted with a voucher attached to it, if it doesn't work out, that person could go and then seek out other housing options, so it wouldn't be like a total loss. And it would open up, in my mind and in my hopes, a different communities for a person to live in, where they felt more safe, more not just in the our folks go to certain zip codes. That's just point blank period. That's where our landlords are, and that's where most of our people go. And it's always a question about safety, or what's around those, what's around in the neighborhood. So I was thinking of it as a subset of our homeless people. This would be a tool that we would use. I feel like it will definitely be a hard sell for a person who's been in the system for a long time, a person that's been in the shelter. I feel like it definitely would be. But one of our other clients that understands the affordability issue, has experienced that as first-time homeless, it actually might be something that's appealing to them. That was the thought that I had in my brain. Maybe it's not offered to every single person.
Well,
Secondly, the thing what Hanalea says, that we have those shared units. Like, I knew that UMD has that Holloway House that they have used, and I guess they're still using. Valerie, you can probably add some insight to that. But what other places are doing? I'm intrigued by what other places are doing the shared housing model, and how has that been going?
well, I guess, so this is Russ. I mean, Housing for New Hope has a version of this by the very nature of Holloway Place.
Right.
And I would agree that probably if we were to take this system-wide, so to speak, we probably would want to pilot this with a couple of different subsets from within the communities to figure out what the barriers are. And I don't mean like housing barriers, but just barriers to accepting this as an option, because I think there's going to have to be some normalization of this as something that's happening on a regular basis, because it just, our experience at Holloway Place was just that a lot of folks didn't understand why they weren't, why am I not going to have my own bathroom? why am I sharing at all, kind of thing. And so I think there's some process to that. So, you know, I wonder if we pick one or two groups that we would want to try and pilot this with, especially as we look at some point here, you know, my understanding is CDI will come offline, and it may not be the case that UMD returns to full capacity. So could part of one of the pilot groups be folks that are coming into the system and need to be, you know, routed into rapid rehousing extremely quickly in order to avoid a shelter stay? Would this become a more attractive option to that group? And then maybe we pick another group that's been in shelter for a while and figure out what it would take to make it an attractive option to them. But I think there needs to be some targeted piloting.
Well, targeted piloting does not necessarily, I mean, it can be an intermediate step, but that's a long ways from a system-wide kind of commitment that Dr. Taylor was describing, at least in my mind. As I understand the process that Dr. Taylor was describing was that everybody who at least comes into shelter is engaged in an assessment as part of their intaking as to whether or not they have any interest in shared housing opportunities. And they may not initially, and the case manager who over a period of time is working with them, as Dr. Taylor described, can do a budgeting process to try to help them understand, okay, if it's fine, you're not interested in shared housing at this point in your homelessness experience, but let's sit down and look at the realities of your income, and perhaps people can realize that based on their income, shared housing might be a viable option. As well as, then the next step becomes, are there people in your life currently that you might be interested in participating in a shared housing experience with? People that, you know, we know a lot of people already come into the homeless housing system from a doubled up situation, which is not quite the same as shared housing, but it is an experience of living with others, right? So people do have some of those experiences. And we can help people understand the finances. We can also work on roommate matching, certainly is a real key. Roommate agreements, not necessarily roommates, but housemates, as it were, are real key. And training, part of the system-wide commitment is around training all of our case managers, training all of our shelter staff to understand the dynamics of shared housing and the roommate matching or the housemate matching processes, so that we don't know necessarily. The challenge with a pilot is we don't really know who might be interested in shared housing and who isn't. And we don't necessarily know who would be a good housemate and who isn't. And so it makes sense to say to people experiencing homelessness, this is one option. It's certainly not for everybody. It was clear in the conversation. It was great to have HSAC member Natalie Byers on the call, but you know, few families, parents with children, are likely to not be as large a pool of people, households interested in shared housing as single unaccompanied adults. But we also know that single unaccompanied adults are our largest subpopulation of people experiencing homelessness in Durham and across the country. And so we could, I think, expand the supply of housing and hopefully rehouse people more quickly if shared housing options are a real option that our community is offering people.
Yeah, and I just want to echo some of what Lloyd said. I don't think we should make assumptions about who is and is not interested in shared housing in the interest of housing choice. We have seen people in the system saying they're interested in shared housing, and those are clients who have been in shelter for a long time. So I definitely don't see this as something that's only appropriate for someone. In fact, sometimes what we see is people are really reluctant to lose community when they go into housing, and they've been homeless a long time and they want to keep their community, and we're not set up to support that. Other times, what we see is someone saying, I want a roommate, but we don't know how to find them a roommate when they don't have one already. So I think it's important that we don't we don't preempt people's housing choice by not offering them. I think some initial steps for this could be, offering shared housing as an option to all single adults. I really liked the video that was shared during the training. I think that could be a great video to show to clients who are wondering about how this might work, and what the pros and cons for them would be. I don't know, Lloyd, if that's a video that's available to us, but the video where she was interviewing the roommates, I think could be a great tool to share with case managers. And then I think developing some sort of assessment to help people assess kind of what their deal breakers are, like she was recommending on roommate options. And having some sort of way for case managers to look at each other's clients and evaluate, do you have anyone who might be a match? Because that's been a real barrier for us when we do have clients saying, I want a roommate, we don't know how to find them one. And that's been challenging. And then Malcolm, I saw you in the chat saying about conflict resolution. I definitely agree there. I think that's the other piece of it is, okay, we can present to rapid rehousing. We have this, household, we found them a match. How do we then support rapid rehousing and being able to do this? And that was the conflict resolution piece. And I don't know that we're set up as a CSC to offer that at this point. And the question is, how do we do that? But those are just some kind of initial low barrier steps that I heard from this group and also from the conversation in the training.
So do we feel like this is something, we're having a lot of robust conversation about this, or is this something that we are going to take to HSAC to endorse that we become a shared housing community from the discussion that we've just had? Or did we already agree to that by allowing her to even come, Lloyd?
We haven't made any commitments to anybody about shared housing. Certainly at the end of the conversation, Dr. Taylor made an invitation to Durham to consider becoming part of her next cohort of kind of shared housing technical assistance. I've clarified with her that the cost for that would be $10,000. As a department, I don't think the city is ready to make that kind of commitment, but I don't think necessarily that we need a commitment to have a technical assistance relationship with the Shared Housing Institute to make a system-wide commitment. I think from my perspective, kind of being the coordinator of the effective case management series, I think we're looking at what process does policy and planning or the HSAC want to use to make a decision around having a system-wide commitment to implementing shared housing. I don't necessarily think that the committee is ready to make a commitment to or a recommendation to the HSAC today, but it is a question I think we would like to see the Policy and Planning Committee learn more about. What questions does the committee have? There are other experts around the country. I've been in touch with, there's a lot of information about shared housing at the Shared Housing Institute .com website. The video that was shown is available there. There's other resources. We've been in touch. So, I mean, there's already housemate agreements. There's landlord agreements. that are publicly available. I've downloaded some of those. I can make some of those resources available. The big question, I think, again, from my perspective, is kind of what process does this committee want to use to research this further, and what kind of legwork do you want to undertake to make a recommendation, perhaps later this year, to the HSAC around a system-wide commitment to shared housing? What other consultation, for example, a consultation with the community of providers. How do you want to consult with them?
So it sounds like, it almost sounds like a new working group. I just don't know. We have a time issue. We have folks transitioning off. All of those things come to the forefront of our mind. Where does this live? Does this live within the constructs of Honolulu's already coordinated entry group? If we're talking about assessments and things like that, I don't know. I do think that we need more time to try to figure out what it is we would like to see happen if we move forward with this, or what it would take. But at this point, I think we have about 3 or 4 people transitioning off for sure in the next month or 2.
So I can respond about the coordinated entry group taking this up. This is something, if y'all wanted to task us with doing, we could do, but we would not be able to take this up immediately. We could probably look at taking it up in the fall.
Can I ask a question? Or go ahead, Russ.
I would just, I guess I would not put this over to coordinated entry. I think a focused group to work on this would make more sense.
Do we want to get it? So are you suggesting that you're interested in the focus group?
So,
Hey,
No, and I probably have, this is maybe a question for another time. Having been on many boards and committees over the years, I still scratch my head at exactly what the role of this group is relative to what is brought to us from staff. And that's not a aspersion against staff. I think I'm more accustomed to situations where staff would prepare a more robust set of, here's the information, here's some potential ways to go, so we have more things to respond to. Because honestly, having listened back to 2 full meetings in order to get the minutes, it is interesting how circular our conversations are. And I think some of that's rooted in us not having, we're responding to theories in many cases, but not necessarily what would this look like in our situation. So,
Russ.
shoot me down, go for it.
No. It was very well put. What I was going to say is I'm hearing sort of what you articulated, what I was thinking in our circular logic here, because to some degree, it sounds like we are already doing shared housing on a small level within our continuum. So the question is, as I'm hearing this and listening to it and coming from a COC, that the only way we were ever able to house single individuals was through shared housing because the rent prices were so insane. The question is, we don't really need to pilot something if it's already being done in one particular program. This is more of a, how do we operationalize this and open shared housing to others within the COC, and making it part of routine case management and part of routine housing first. And the way I've seen it operationalized in the past is meeting with clients and saying, hey, what is your housing plan? And somebody's like, oh, well, I want to live in a 5-bedroom house with, 7 bathrooms on 3 acres of land. Fantastic. Let me see your budget. And the budget is, I have $200 a month. It's like, okay, well, that 5-bedroom, 7-bathroom house is a great goal. Let's start with, what can we do today to get you into housing? And do you have friends? Do you have family members? And then start looking for rooms to rent or matching people up. And some of our shared housing wasn't with other people who were necessarily homeless. It was other people who had owned a home and opened a bedroom up and matching there. The challenges that and the operationalization, I'm interested to hear Valerie's take on this with their experience on the shared housing side, was when we did it with rapid rehousing, a lot of unsheltered encampments took advantage of this because they were already living in a community. The case management side of it took a lot of time because there were habits that were happening in the campsites that sometimes rolled over into the shared housing unit that required
Right.
issues. And being in that home-ish, in that confined space of a home versus in an encampment,
Right.
personality conflicts come into play. So it really comes down to needing much more time available for the case managers to do supportive services. But if we're already doing this, the question is, in my mind, not do we want to continue doing this, but how do we open this to more people in the COC in an operationalization fashion versus should we start doing this because we already are? So the question is, do we open it up? And it sounds like the answer is yes, this should be a viable option. The next step is, how do we want to operationalize it?
Thank you, Colin. Everything you just said is spot on. Like if there are fireworks, I would shoot them off. So for folks that may be unaware, just a quick overview. We've had the opportunity to manage a home. An investor was very gracious to allow us to manage a house. So we've had it for about, I think, close to 4 years now, about 3-4 years. And it's really been a wonderful opportunity to provide housing options for people who may have been denied housing through some, landlords because of their records or whatnot. And also, just to echo what everyone else has said, the community aspect. So there have been people who have relapsed in the Holloway house, but then it's a house, it's a home. So people are able to share with the case manager, and then we can provide wraparound services or figure out the best option for that person. If shared housing is not working, then we'd figure out another option. What's been a challenge is that when there are personality conflicts, since we only have one house, there's not the flexibility to transfer roommates or those things. So that would be great if we would be able to expand the program, but it has worked well over time. We've seen folks be able to save money, and there's still just that camaraderie that we see in the house. So it's been working very well. But it is what sounds great to me is that this is a solution. We've all seen that, of course, our housing inventory in Durham is what it is, right? There's not much we can do except for shared housing. It's really our most viable option. And we have to make an entire culture shift. And just to agree with everyone, that includes our agencies, our providers, our case managers, the people that we're serving. And so it has to be strategic because it is a huge shift when people have been either serving in or receiving services from our system, and it's looked a certain way for a really long time. So we'll have to be very strategic in how we create this culture shift because this is a great opportunity. But it'll definitely take some work, and I look forward to it. I'm not volunteering to be on the team, but I look forward to the shifts because it's definitely time for us to have a major culture shift in our community because this is a solution for our issues. So.
I'd just like to say too, especially from the entry point perspective, I think this would be a great option, especially when working with diversion, when we're trying to prevent people from even coming into the shelter and homeless system, that this would work wonderful if we could have other options to offer individuals that we are trying to divert. I think definitely we should consider it.
So, LeVay, you're speaking on as if like we had several houses where we could actually place people as part of our diversion array of services where they could go into a shared living situation. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Sounds like there's been a proposal on the table to create a working group. if that's going to be a subcommittee of this group, you would need a chair from this group. If you're just proposing creating a COC working group, we don't necessarily need a chair from this group, but we just have to figure out how to put that together out of this conversation. And those normally flow more like bottom up. I don't know if there is anyone in this group who's willing. We really just need one person who's willing to work. But I mean, what I'm hearing is that you'd want to put together a working group. And then there you're going to need, you know, the landlord recruitment folks from, you're going to need the rapid rehousing people. You're going to need some shelter case managers, maybe even ideally some landlords. But putting together like a group who really wants to work on this as a project, it sounds like is what's been proposed.
I would
You
agree
also
with that
need-
statement. I don't think that the group could come out of this group at this point. It would have to be a COC based group.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right, Sharita.
It cannot
So
come
maybe
out
we
of this
just put
group.
out an email to the COC saying, you know, we're looking at people who are interested in working on expanding shared housing options, who's interested, and try to put the group together that way.
It'll be a first time trying it, but I'm not averse to that. What do you guys think?
Okay.
What is
It's worth a try, Himalaya.
what is the task that this group is going to have to? What is this group's task going to be?
I think from what I heard that you would be putting together the group of people who would be implementing shared housing, and they'd be really problem solving. What's preventing us from doing this? You know, how do we overcome those barriers? What do we need to put in place? You know, and they'd be working on it as a project.
And also, I think creating shared values. So everyone coming together may not already be on the same page, but I think developing some shared values will be important too.
So if the goal is how to operationalize this, then you need your, you know, program managers and to some degree the case managers from all of your providers to be part of this, or at least leadership at a programmatic level in order for emergency shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, PSH, all of your providers are all going to have skin in the game and be part of how do we design this, because each one of these interventions is going to be looking at shared housing with a slightly different lens and slightly different challenges. So it may be that we sort of say, hey, you know, this is the time where we actually pull the providers together and work out operationalizing it. Because if we don't pull all of the providers together, we're going to come up with something and then try and implement it and then have to do the trainings on it. It'll be a whole lot easier to do it bringing, you know, just from the provider level in.
May I say something?
No.
I think I'd remind us what it took to look at, if people remember, the very long room that we sat in where Aaron Doler stood at the front of the room it wasn't even a brainstorming session, but it was like a community-wide, this is how coordinated entry is going to work conversation. And that's what I see some component of what Dr. Taylor's talking about and where our best chances for success lay. So those are a set of skills that require some real organizing for someone to lead that. And that, I think that makes me a little hesitant about how do we do that? Like, who's the best person to lead that if it's not something that we can pay for? And to Colin's point, I don't think it's a question of like, do we do this or should we do this? It's more about how. I think everybody agrees it's a good idea. Like, I think it's a great idea. I think that people on the outside who don't have enough money to rent housing would think it's a great idea. I think landlords who look at people who are clients with barriers, if they even saw someone else that wasn't related to them who was bought into having that same commitment of liability to live in an apartment with them, would have more flexibility in taking that person. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons for there to be buy-in around it, but that conversation has to be led in an organizing fashion that that is, is different than just providers saying like, and nothing against any of the conversation around the resources. I don't think it's a knowledge or research-based conversation where we look at a couple of things, we read some things, we watch some things and say, hey, this sounds like a good idea. We don't have buy-in at that level. You have to have buy-in from your community undertaking an emotional commitment to this too, because there'd be what sounds like a lot of training. So all of that said, if that's a thing, I'm very excited about that, but that has to have some resources behind it. Where do those resources come from?
So let me be clear. In terms of CDD being able to pay for technical assistance on this, that is something that is a possibility. The challenge is we have to go through a procurement process. And right now we are working through trying to figure out how to get all the procurements done that need to happen, because there's a boatload of COVID funds that are taking priority over this type of thing. So this is one of these things that, sure, we could do this. We just need to figure out where it's going to fit in the schedule to be able to make it happen and when that'll work.
So, excuse me, I'm going to need to excuse myself from the meeting, but I appreciate the very robust dialogue that we're having, and I think it's very good. I think from my perspective in the COC lead position, it could be helpful to have direction from the leadership of the COC to say that we want to make shared housing a priority strategy for helping our community respond to the needs of homeless people. And there's various ways certainly that could happen, but it's up to in my mind, up to the COC leadership to perhaps form a working group or direct the department to form a working group to explore how we can move shared housing further up the priority for our responses to homelessness in Durham. Thanks,
Lloyd,
everybody.
before you jump off, did you get any kind of cost estimate from the Shared Housing Institute of what other communities have paid for this?
So again, their basic technical assistance, peer COC. I mean, she mentioned having 4 or 5. One group started now. For larger COCs, it was $15,000 for like a 12-week series, I think, with 4 or 5 participants per COC. For us, she has committed to $10,000. But as Colin mentioned, we would have to deal with the RFP process that the city has, unless we've figured out other alternative funding strategies. So I've made no commitment to her, obviously, and I quite honestly, I don't think we need necessarily the resources of the Shared Housing Institute to move this forward in Durham. I mean, there are other resources that we can take advantage of.
Thanks, Lloyd. The reason I'm asking is just because I did want to clarify that that's below the RFP threshold. We would not need to do an RFP necessarily.
Okay.
So I think this group, if this group wants to direct us to look at bringing in some outside resources, that is something that you could vote on. You could also direct us to create a working group ourselves and staff it. I think, those are just, y'all have been asking about some specific asks. So those are some things you could vote on if you wanted to.
Thanks, everybody.
So, I mean, it sounds like we're comfortable with the idea of saying, yes, we should move in the direction of more shared housing. I do really like Malcolm's reference back to when NCCH kind of gathered everybody, because I do think it's really important, particularly in this system, for the kind of enculturation piece to happen as little as possible top down. Like, it really needs to be like getting the housing providers on board. I think that's probably the root of where some of this still struggle with what housing first means and how we're going to do it still exists for us. So, I mean, I think if somebody could be here to facilitate those kind of conversations, that we are going to go this direction. Sure. But we're going to talk about what it means to go this direction and what questions people have. And then we're going to design the process of moving that direction.
Sounds like a facilitator to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody facilitating those
Yeah.
conversations with some sketch of here's really what this is likely to look like. And you've got 2 or 3 groups that are doing some version of this already, UMD really being the lead. It's nice that it's not completely brand new, but I do think that kind of conversation made a big difference last time, so that it's not top down from the city.
I want to
Or
respond to
HSAC
one
or
point
whatever.
that Colin said about the procurement process, which I don't know anything necessarily about, but only that she left me with also one impactful statement, and it might have been from, and I apologize if I get the name wrong, but I think she referenced Diane Nealon, who said that like now is our best time to end homelessness, right? We're more in hand with resources than we may ever be. And so just that component too of that, like, that's the perfect storm in the sense of taking the money that you have to do this to go all the way on it. It doesn't, as a slow decision maker, I didn't love it because that makes me have to like move my feet faster, but it also did bring a point about that, like, look, you're not going to get a clear sort of avenue, or even if someone's going to say, well, you have so much money in your system, you're going to say, yeah. And the best way to actually, which is what I felt, is the question is not about all the money in the system, it's how do we use it? And this definitely seems like a way to really maximize using the money that otherwise we're kind of left up to like hoping that we spend it all.
And what I mean is, you may not have to, there is a procurement process for any time government money is spent. And sometimes it's a major RFP, sometimes it's, you have to go out and seek out, is there anybody else in the world who does this except for the Shared Housing Corporation? My inclination is there are probably others who also do shared housing. So we'd have to reach out, do some research, find out who does it, and sort of say, okay, here are their quotes, here's what it would be. And then come up with a decision on who to do, put a contract in place. I mean, there's a process to it. And I hear what you're saying, Malcolm. Yes, this does help us utilize some of the other resources that are coming to the community. And we can look at figuring out how to merge all of these together. And right now we're seeing some capacity limitations on the homeless team. We're trying to get through a hiring process to bring another person on board. We still have ESG COVID-2 funds that need to go out. We need to start planning for what to do with $4.3 million of home funds to bring back a conceptual project to city and county leadership to see if that could possibly be a larger pool of funds that could turn into something more than what $4.3 million could be done with. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and it's trying to figure out not just our team capacity, also our HSAC capacity, department capacity, and city capacity to sort of put all these things through a narrow bandwidth.
So it sounds like there's been a proposal to direct us to go back and take a look at if it's within our bandwidth to get some external support on this and what that would take. Is that I think that might be something that could use a motion if that's the proposal on the table. Just want to clarify what we're being directed to do.
So would there have to be an RFP process to get somebody to come on board?
It would have.
So what if we have somebody in mind already?
Well, if you have somebody in mind, even if you have somebody in mind, we have to go through, there is anytime government money is spent, there's a procurement that has to happen. So it could be as easy as a waiver of competition, which is a request to the city manager to sign saying, yes, I grant permission. You don't have to go through any of the normal stuff, and you can basically give this to this person without having any competitive process. The next step is looking at, okay, are there more than 3 people who, is there anybody else in the country who can do this type of work for a more cost-effective manner? If so, would they meet our needs? If yes, then you go with that group. Then, depending on your budget, it could go all the way out to doing a month-long RFP process. But at the end of whatever procurement process happens, you still have to put a contract into place that has to be signed by city manager. $10,000 probably doesn't have to go to city council, but it would need to go to city manager to be executed. So it's a couple month process by the time you get a contract, get it executed, and are able to start doing it. Keeping that in mind, we also have ESG COVID contracts and an RFP that will be coming out. We're starting the ESG statewide competition and a HUD NOFA competition all at the same time, and need to do an RFP this fall for coordinated entry with diversion. So there's a whole lot of other stuff. This is not and I guess that's what I'm trying to say is this isn't the only thing that requires attention and is time sensitive. And looking at the time sensitivity, this is important, but some of these other things, if we don't do, we lose money, and we may lose money by not doing this. So it's trying to figure out how and where does this fit in?
This is Valerie, I just have a quick question and then a comment. So right now, what we're talking about is the possibility of hiring someone to come in and facilitate, right? So my thought is that I don't think right now that's needed. I think with what we have now, we can just start with the folks that we have and build out. So then we're not going through a 2-month process. I think once we have this group, if that group decides that it's overwhelming or that they're at a point where external assistance is needed, maybe that would be a good place. But I think right now we can just start with the community and build out from there.
So that would take us back to the working group, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
just
that works.
wondering if this is a place where maybe SAID could have, it could be brought to SAID and then maybe a group organically kind of comes out of that group, or maybe SAID is the group that we feel some of these initial questions from, since a lot of our providers are at that table.
That's a good, I like that, Frida, especially because that's what we've been talking about, is how to kind of bridge some of the gaps from some of the groups that we're in. So I think that's definitely something we can talk about and tease out instead.
Are you still the chair?
Yes.
Okay. So you're willing to have that conversation at your next SAID meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
And Valerie, just let us know if you need anything from staff, like if you need staff to be there, anything we can support.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being willing to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is our busy season, Colin, when all of our funding requests and all of that stuff goes out. But I think that it is an important topic because we're talking about refining our package of resources to our clients that we're accountable to. And so I think this is going to be a game changer in a time where we are having a very difficult time finding people a place to live. And we don't know what's going to happen in the midst of our new variant that's coming online and all kinds of things. So we may be in for a longer haul than we expected. I know everybody thought, we were opening up and good to go, but I think we're getting some hiccups right now with these numbers rising. So that might make that roll out slower than we imagined. So I think it becomes important in discussion of what our package to our community, what it looks like.
I think as a community, we have enough knowledge and experience to start a process. We've got housing locators, we've got somebody who's kind of doing this already, and it may be sort of a trial and error, which a lot of this is anyway. Even if you bring in an outside consultant, you have to start off with trying something. And there are some resources that are out there that can help guide discussions and how to implement this. So I think it's a good plan.
I think we
I
have.
wanted to put out two quick thoughts, Sharita.
Go ahead.
Hanale, your question about like what it, I know this is a couple minutes back and it sounds like we're at the working group phase and that's fine. I would like to just sort of say that I do think that it's worthwhile at staff's capacity to investigate into the, like what the procurement process could look like for when that time, because let's say it goes a couple months, right? And we need some more expertise, better than to have that sort of, hey, this is what we found out for you, or we're able to find it out now, than the 2 months sort of that it would take to find out some of that stuff. So that's one thing, or just have some knowledge about what's there. The second part was, there was a component to this that I thought was really valuable in HMIS that I think mattered a lot. And from what I heard Dr. Taylor say, that could, like, there might even be the chance, and maybe this is something that we'd have to pay for, so maybe not, but that some of those LSAs at the Connecticut place and the Los Angeles place could talk to some of our people at NCCH about what the build out for that is like. I thought that survey was just a really necessary component in terms of the client-centered part of it. And there was one other thing in how they did that in HMIS that I thought made it really valuable, and I might have sort of sent us for a loop. But just finding out what that could be like so that we had a backstop, I think would be really, really important. So that, like, we know how to gather that information for our clients when we decide to start piloting it, right? Who's gonna own wherever it goes, and that they were doing it on Smartsheet, and how effective and facile, Hanale, you've been on Smartsheet so far, and the team really has been great. You know, that's just something we don't have to have a uplift on.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm told what to put in, I have no problem building something out in Smartsheets for the community. It's really just about figuring out what's going to go into the assessment. I was thinking it could look, you know, just the case manager's contact information, the preferences that we've stated we want to clarify, and then we have a database of people who are looking for roommates that doesn't have, you know, necessarily identifying information that people can match. I don't have a problem building that out. That's the easy part. It's just figuring out what needs to go into it that this group could do, and then I can build it. That'll take me an hour. That's pretty simple.
Okay.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So we have two items on our agenda. It looks like this meeting is going to be longer than I thought it was going to be. We have our priorities for state ESG, and then the added information about COC liaison. Hanale, can we just review the COC liaison update stuff like really quickly? Because I think you were the one that was telling us about it. I think you wrote the protocol and stuff up. Yeah, can we do that? And then we'll have the remaining time to discuss the priority recommendations and things like that.
Sorry, I don't have anything to share about COC liaisons. I don't think the item came from me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think that the question got raised by someone else, and then we were trying to figure out, I think it was near the end of a meeting, and we were trying to figure out when recruitment would happen, because we thought we were off, the months were off or something because of what happened last year. And so trying to figure out what that was.
The current plan is to do the turnaround at the same time.
That's September?
That would be in September, yeah. Is that right, Ruby? Is that what
Yes.
So is that all you needed to know? Russ, that was your only concern?
So does that
Or
mean
you were not available to that time?
No, I'm available to that time. I know that Malcolm, Valerie, and I had all said we were willing to. You said that, Hanalea, that we are technically in through November. We all said, hey, we're okay with rotating out August for things to line up. I guess I'm just asking because that's 6 weeks away.
Right. So what we ended up realizing was that wouldn't line up anyway, since we have to bring on the new members and everything. So that's how we ended up deciding not to have y'all rotate off early.
So will we be recruiting new CLC liaisons in the August meeting or would we recruit in September, with September being Russ, Malcolm, Valerie's last term time? Is that how we describe it, for new members to be in place in October?
Yeah, so I think the plan will be that y'all will attend through the September meeting since those are before the September HSAC meeting. So recruitment will happen in August. And the executive committee is the one that has to confirm the new slate of COC liaisons. But they need to know first how many members will be on each committee to be able to appoint the appropriate number of COC liaisons. So what will happen is, I think what we're saying is in August, we'll have the correct number of new committee members, which will allow in the September executive committee meeting for them to appoint the correct number of COC liaisons, which means y'all will attend through September, and then the new slate will come in October, since those will be after the executive committee meeting, if that makes sense. And if that's correct, Ruby, feel free to correct anything I said.
Correct.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so the last item on our agenda is priorities for the state ESG funds competition. And I think the staff will talk about it, and then we will have discussion and hopefully entertain a vote.
This
And our
is
last.
just
Go ahead, Colin.
what we would like to know is whether or not the committee would like to set priorities for ESG funds that are coming forth from the state. The state released their application and is due at the end of September or October 1st. So we've got 12 weeks to get this all sorted out. However, we just wanted to know if we want to prioritize more money towards rapid rehousing or allow the or towards anything actually. And or there is a 60-40 split that at least 60% of the funds have to be spent on permanent solutions, which is the rapid rehousing and prevention activities, and 40% can be used for no more than 40% can be used for emergency shelter and street outreach. So the question is, do we want to shift any of those? Do we want to prioritize? The community development team, the recommendation is with the extra ESG COVID funds coming out, we didn't see a need to have to set a priority or shift those funds around, but wanted to run it past this committee so that we could take the appropriate steps to work it into the HSAC agenda and part of the scoring process.
We got a waiver last year to shift the allotments too, right? Like a significant amount, maybe to 80-20 for sheltering, right?
Yes, we shifted more towards emergency shelter because we had shifted a
But
whole lot.
wasn't that for state ESG CV, not for just state ESG?
This is straight ESG.
Yeah, I
This
think Malcolm, the thing you're thinking of was state ESG CV funds.
Okay.
Not this pot, but related.
Yeah, and so I guess just I know they're all different, and I'm actually so happy that I don't have to know them inside and out. But but one thing that I wanted to bring up for that is to say that if we're sort of going down on that trend, even depending if the dollars come from a slightly different pot, should we be keeping 40% at the emergency shelter level since we had to go up so high for emergency shelter before, and rather than you have to use 60%, but you could use more, and you can't use any more than 40%. I'm sort of wondering, do we let those numbers sit right where they are? Because if anything, it seems like we're going to have more need for emergency shelter dollars than rapid rehousing. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
If you get, go ahead, Russ.
Well, and I was going to ask two related questions. One clarification is it's emergency solutions money. And I say that before I say the next thing I'm going to say in a minute here, because emergency solutions is street outreach and emergency shelter. So that I don't sound like I'm about to throw shelter under the bus. So my question is, Colin, if I'm not mistaken, the ESG CV money, all of that basically expires around June 2022, right?
Um,
At least everything
Good
I've
que-
got currently does.
Good question. Yes and no.
Go on.
Emergency shelter funds from the ESG COVID must be fully spent by January 31st, 2022. So those funds have to be drawn down, basically spent by the end of December so that we can draw it out of the system by the end of January. Everything else would go till basically June 30th of next year, maybe June, maybe the end of July, because there needs to be time to process the invoices and get those funds drawn by September 30th of next year.
Okay. So then that brings my other question was, then do we need to think about some prioritization around, if we know that it seems as though at some point CDI is coming back into, the CDI folks are going to come back to UMD or into other versions of housing. If we're continuing to try and be housing first, do we need to look at ways to use more of this towards various rapid rehousing programs? Because a number of us have flexed up with COVID money, and we could maintain some of the flexing if we used more of this for for rapid rehousing across the system versus shelter.
If it helps, let me share my screen and I can show you the breakdown of where the ESG COVID money is in, like by bucket. And that may help some of this to see how much money is available in which pot. All right, can you see this?
Okay, yep.
Okay, so this is how this is all breaking out. Look at the amount allocated. There's $486,456 for prevention, $110,000 for outreach, $866,000 for emergency shelter, $933,681 for rapid rehousing. And then $266,000 for admin. Out of this, right now, $231,839 is in contract currently or has already been spent. So that's like Open Table Ministries and Project Access. Then rapid rehousing, that is how much is in phase 1 of the ESG COVID pot that Housing for New Hope is working on spending. And then this is how much admin is in the 2 pots right now. So the RFP that'll come out has $634,000 that'll have to be spent by December 31st, but we'll be allowed to go back for expenses back to, I want to say March 5th or 3rd, if there are eligible expenses that have not been billed and we can verify that there's no duplication of benefits. The same thing with rapid rehousing, $453,000. And then obviously it's 486 and 110. And if you give me a minute, I think, let me pull up the email from Boyd. Pull up the so we have $102,903 for 2903 for emergency shelter / street outreach, and a minimum of $68,000 602 for prevention rapid rehousing.
It'd be more than that, shouldn't it? You said it was
No,
60,
sorry, I
40.
got it reversed. Sorry, I reversed. I think it's a minimum 40%. Sorry.
So 68 for the emergency solutions and 102 for the prevention rapid rehousing.
No. So I'm reading from Lloyd's email. I always flip the percentages. In my mind, ESG puts 60%, but that's from what I've been used to having is at least 60%, sometimes 100% is going, like there's no money for emergency shelters. But the way it's broken out is there's $171,504 totally available. And a maximum, so we can't spend more than 60% on emergency services. So we're capped at 102. And you have to spend a minimum of 40% on permanent solutions, which is prevention or rapid rehousing. I apologize, I got those flipped in my head. So you could, the only thing you can do, we cannot increase that 102 for emergency shelter. You could increase the prevention and rapid rehousing if you wanted to. However, these funds will run January 1st till December 31st of 2022. And that's about when emergency shelter is going to run out of their ESG COVID funds, because they'll have to have all the emergency shelter COVID spent by the end of this calendar year. And the rapid rehousing funds that are in the ESG COVID will go out till the end of June or July.
So to Russ's point about the upstaffing for rapid rehousing, this is less than 1/10 of what the ESG CV pot is. So is it, I know it's not a negligible amount of money, but does it make a difference to set up some priorities if they're just if we know that the amounts that are there for emergency solutions would help benefit if CDI needs to go on longer, and Russ, that amount of $68,000 helping to keep rapid rehousing going longer to do what you were talking about? Like, do we need to make it more complicated than that by setting priorities?
I was thinking that I would be in agreement with community development about not making a recommendation unless there was some compelling thing for me to consider.
And I think that's fine. I was just asking the question.
I don't make the final decision. I mean, I don't make the decision myself. I need to hear from you. Like, Russ, what are you thinking? And Malcolm, like, I need to hear from you guys. So you guys are doing it. So what are you thinking?
I mean, I almost have too much of a vested interest to say much more.
I understand that.
Yep. And I think I'm kind of in the same space with Russ.
Right.
But we all work together, right? So at the end of the day, we all work together and we make the best choices. I think just coming from the shelter side, I'm grateful how we've all worked together throughout the pandemic, and I know we'll continue to work together, but I don't know what next month will be for the shelter or next week, right? So our world is a little different. So I'm not ready to make any major decisions about prioritizing or shifting when we don't know what type of emergency we may come across soon. So
I'm kind of in that place I'm kind of in that place too, because
Okay.
I'm watching the news
Mhm.
and getting my updates from the CDC, and I just don't know what's gonna happen. So,
Mhm.
um,
And I think, Shirley, I think that's the hat we need to wear, right? Is that we feel great and we're optimistic, but we also just need to make sure that we have a good balance as well when we're making these decisions.
I would say let's see how folks apply, and we go from there.
Yeah.
Because people still have to apply. So.
Mhm.
And we've had some challenges with ESG funds in the past. So, I mean, I don't think that we're necessarily going to be free from those challenges as well. So we'll see.
And it is tough to spend all of these funds. We've got so much money coming in, and as a continuum, we are behind in getting things spent. So, and this is not a slight towards anybody. It's just we have capacity issues. It's hard to find staff. It's hard to find landlords. It's hard to
Right.
staff up emergency shelters and keep staff on board during a pandemic.
Mhm.
In terms of closing down of CDI, at some point, will we close CDI down? Yeah, at some point it will close. However, the contract for CDI has gone through county management and will be online until December 31st, which is a full 6 months. And it wouldn't end. The only thing that would cause it to end early would be social distance guidelines are lifted. And then there would be a 30-day notice that, at least 30-day notice that it would be closing. So that would be, we'd essentially be returning to normal operations at that point. At this point, talking with Drew, public health, and emergency management, it would be really, really, really hard to justify closing CDI until social distancing guidelines are lifted, because we would just be shifting a whole lot of people to unsheltered homelessness if we can't move people into permanent housing and open urban ministries back to full capacity. And everybody understands that, so there doesn't seem to be a rush to close things, but also keeping an eye on what is CDC recommendations saying.
So I'm just curious about what folks are thinking. The recommendation from community development is that we not set a priority. We've had some conversations from Russ and things to consider. I will entertain next steps on this matter. A motion if so inclined, and a vote or additional discussion. No.
I'm good
Was
with us
also
going with, I'm good with us going with staff's recommendation.
Is that the motion?
I don't usually make motions and things like that. That's really Malcolm's role.
And Russ has a conflict of interest to make a motion anyway.
Russ, what's funny
But
is
he's
I was thinking
following,
the
but
same
he's
thing,
following
like that's
your
Malcolm's role.
recommendation though. He still can't make the motion?
He can make a
Not
he can make a
technically.
motion.
I'll make the motion for Russ, which is that we follow the recommendation of that the city has put forward.
So I have a motion, I need a second.
I second it.
Thank you, Ms. Levette. Seconded by Levette. All those in favor, yes in the chat box, no in the chat box, or abstain in the chat box, please. I'm assuming that I'm gonna have at least 3 people abstaining, is that correct? You have to rescind yours, right, Russ?
I'm writing it now. In the morning. I think it's just Valerie and I that abstain.
Okay.
I'm not under any.
Russ, and that's
I have to
after I
abstain.
deleted my yes.
So A vote from me, Malcolm, Ms. Colleen, Levette. Motion carries. It is approved. That concludes all the items I have on the agenda. Colin and I'll go back to the drawing board for next month's meeting. I thank you guys for being willing to have a July meeting, and we're ending right on time. It is noon.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all very, very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Look forward to
Are we on
meeting
this-
with you next month. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Are we on the 9th or the 16th? Does anybody know for the next month?
It's the second Monday, so it would be the 9th.
Oh, it's the 9th. Okay, great.
Mhm.
All right. I'll be here.
See you
See you
on
guys
the
then.
9th of August. Bye all. Meeting adjourned.
Bye all.